In this video, we'll see how to tune the ambient occlusion and the normal generation in Grand Designer. So for that, we will go to the Other tab, which is the fifth tab in Planet. And you have a lot of parameters for the ambient occlusion and some parameters for the normal generation. So the ambient occlusion, what is it exactly? Well, you can isolate it here by clicking on the AO, and you will see only the ambient occlusion. Basically, the idea behind ambient occlusion is the accessibility to the light of the pixels. So if you are in a crease, if you are in something that is recessed in the planet, then it will be darker, like you have over here. And if it's well exposed, if you are on the top of a mountain or stuff like that, like here on the top of the crater, then you will have no occlusion. It will be totally accessible to the light. So it's a kind of shadow thing without taking into account a specific light, but more a general vision of the lighting. So in Grand Designer, the ambient occlusion is computed as the sum of three different kind of ambient occlusion. You have the low frequency, medium, and high frequency, and you can tune separately these three ambient occlusion. So the low frequency is the largest part of the occlusion. It's just taking into account the big occluder that can block the light. The medium frequency is about the medium size thing, and the high frequency is just for the very small variation, so it's very localized. So you can fine-tune this value here by reducing their importance or increasing their importance. It's really up to you to tune that as you wish. It may have a strong influence on the look of the planet. So if I go back to the material, you can see that the ambient occlusion is already present in the albedo of the planet. This is tuned by the ambient occlusion in diffuse. So if I reduce that to 0, you will have just the pure diffuse lighting. So it's only the color that you define in the relief tab over here, with the coloring of the mountains depending on the altitude. So there are no creases and stuff like that visible here. I have to increase the AO into diffuse to see that more strongly, and you can burn that if you want. It will look more well, cartoonish, extreme. I mean, if you go over 1, but it's really up to you. It may be quite interesting in some case. So with these three sliders, you can really define the shading, the basic shading of your planet. Then you have the AO quality. So it's basically how many samples will be used to compute the ambient occlusion. So if you reduce that, you may see some noise like you have over here. So you see the dots over here. It's because I've reduced the quality. If I increase the quality, the dots will disappear and it will be much smoother, but it will take more time to compute. So it's just a trade-off between quality and speed. Then you have the AO curve, which is exactly the same system as for the 8. So I can really tune the value if I want to reduce the low value. which will be much more visible here. So I basically increase the occlusion. I can just smooth out the ramp, or I can make kind of a plateau here, and it will look more cartoonish. So you have total control of what you're doing. You can reduce the maximum and or increase the minimal value, and you can smooth out everything. It's really up to you to tune that as you wish. Then you can tune the quantity of ambient occlusion you have in water. We've not seen yet the water, but you get the idea. And then you can tint that ambient occlusion. If you put it to 0, it will just be a darkening of the color. So you see now it's darkening. And if I increase the tinting, it's more tinted like this in a brown shades. And you can tune the bias to move in that shade of brown. You can of course edit that ramp with any color. So if you want to have an ambient occlusion that will be green or whatever, you can easily do that. Here I will increase the grayness of the ambient occlusion. So you can really have a quite good control on the ambient occlusion and the impact it has on the diffuse. Then you have the normal. The normal is what allows all these details to pop out, especially when doing the lighting. And the normals by default has a value, the ground normals has a value of 1, but you can increase that, so it will increase the influence of the slopes on the planet, or decrease that to have something that will be more flat. You can have a look at the normal over here and see the difference between strong values and low values, which is very soft, a soft normal. Grand Designer is also computing the curvature of the map here, so you can see that over here. So it's darker when you have creases, and it's lighter when you are on top of pikes and stuff like that. This curvature is used for the high frequencies of the ambient occlusion, as well as some other features we will see later on, like the sediment and stuff like that. You can also use the curvature to paint on top of your diffuse color with the curvature coloring. So if I increase that value, all the parts that are more exposed, so the pikes and the stuff that stand out in the relief will be colored. And if you increase the curvature coloring spreading, then it will generalize that to a larger value of curvature. So it will cover a bigger part of the spikes. Let's say even the smallest spike will be colored if you increase the curvature coloring spread. So it may be interesting in some planet to make some details pop up. So that's it for this other tab, so the ambient occlusion and the normal. It was a quite small one, but it's probably one of the most important for the global look of your planet, because the ambient occlusion is a very strong influence on how realistic it will look.